Howdy, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Conservative Heat. I'm your host, Lucas Heaton. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you guys to please subscribe to the channel if you're new and hit the like button and the bell for notifications so you guys never miss another video. Today, we have a very special guest on here today. This gentleman right here helped me get involved in politics when I was about 9-10 years old, and I've known him for a very long time. He's a really good friend of mine, and he's done a lot of good in Nashville when he was a state representative. So, Representative Ragan, thank you so much for being on today.
Well, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. And this time of year especially, I wish every one of your viewers a very happy holiday season, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for being on today. So, I guess we'll get started. So, where are you originally from? I think you're from North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, I grew up in western North Carolina. The closest town to me was Morganton, a little village which is actually in existence here in East Tennessee by the same name, Glen Alpine. However, I can truthfully say I didn't live in either one of them. We were on the outskirts. I grew up in a farming area. So I spent my youth with chores on the farm. The criteria to determine if you were old enough to have a chore was if you were big enough to pick up a water bucket and it cleared the ground, you had a chore. That was watering animals. And from that point on, your chores stayed with you, but you grew, you got more responsibility and more work, more chores. In my high school years, I had the duties of milking as well as gardening, and I hired out to my neighbors, one of whom employed me on his combine, and another of whom employed me in general farm work. That was when my first employment took place. I was 13 years old. And my dad's rule to me was, okay, son, you can earn money that way, but your chores at home come first. So I learned the value of good hard work, the fact that it wouldn't hurt you, and I even learned to like it. However, I have to say truthfully that I didn't like farming from the standpoint if you had animals, your time wasn't your own. So I made a determination early on that I was not going to be a farmer when I was an adult. However, the small community, Glen Alpine, that I went to school in, had a school of about 500 students. That's the high school. And we graduated, my graduating class was about 99 students. We had a number of I guess you'd call it the village elders in there, sons of daughters of doctors and pharmacists and lawyers and what have you. But most of us were in the farming community. So playing football was kind of interesting there because whenever we had practice in the beginning of the season, starting in July, the coach didn't have to do much conditioning work at all because we'd all been out working in the field, baling hay and taking care of animals and stuff like that. We kind of came in some sort of basic shape, which served us well. I think my whole high school football career, we lost 3 games, which is something to be quite proud of. And actually, I'll have to credit the coach for that because he was, in fact, later inducted into the Coaching Hall of Fame in the state of North Carolina. Wow. But that said, I left high school at the age of 18 and went into the military. I had had a dream of being in the military because on one of those farming chores when I was, I think, about 14 years old, right at the end of school, I had been sent back from the field to bring some tools and supplies back to where we were working. And I was coming out of the tool shed and I heard this noise. My whole body vibrated and couldn't figure out what was going on. I had an armload of stuff and I looked up and I saw a B-47. Of course, I didn't know what it was at the time, flying over so low that I could see the pilots in the cockpit. Of course, I dropped everything I had a hold of and just was transfixed watching it. I made a decision at that point that someday I'm going to do that. And that was where I made my decision also to find out what was necessary for me to be able to do that. So I oriented my studies, my trips to the library, which my parents were always very, very understanding about getting me to the library at least once a week, which was a trip of about 6 or 8 miles into the local library there. But I studied what it took to do that. And so when I said I went into the military, my high school career was oriented towards getting into one of the military academies, and specifically the Air Force Academy. And again, I was very fortunate that I worked hard and qualified to do that. And I went to Colorado Springs, Colorado. I went through the Air Force Academy for 4 years. And I have to say, it was an experience that was very unique. Many of my classmates hated it because they weren't able to go to the Wednesday night pizza parties or the keg parties or the sorority, fraternity parties, etc. But for me, I was living the dream. I got the chance to do things that I couldn't have done otherwise, and I loved it. Then I graduated and went to pilot training, and again, living my dream. I went through Vance Air Force Base, which is in Enid, Oklahoma, and graduated from there and did well enough in my class, which was meritocracy. You got to pick your assignments based on how high you were ranked in the class. And I was high enough to choose to be able to fly an F-4. I went to Shaw Air Force Base where I flew the reconnaissance versions, the RF-4. And again, I was living the dream. I loved it. In the meantime, I had gotten married. And at Shaw Air Force Base, my first daughter was born. And my wife and I, of course, loved the area. Everywhere except during the summer when it was hot and muggy. But from Shaw, I got another assignment 5 years later back to the training command, and I went to Wichita Falls, Texas, which is right on the border about 20 or 30 miles south of the Oklahoma state line. But great flying. I loved being an instructor. Most of the time I was there, I taught German students, which was an interesting, shall we say, bump in the career. Very, very challenging in a lot of respects, but very rewarding too. And from Shaw, I went into the F-111, which is the fighter bomber swing wing, sometimes called McNamara's Nightmare, a be everything, do everything aircraft. It was designed to be a high-speed supersonic interceptor, also deliver nuclear ordnance and all kinds of things. Very challenging aircraft to fly, high pilot workload, but again, I loved it. And I did that at Mountain Home, which is in Idaho. Then I was assigned overseas to Britain at Upper Heyford, and I flew the F-111 all over Europe and a few other places too that I can't talk about. From there, I got a staff assignment, went to Germany at Ramstein Air Force Base and was a member of the headquarters U.S. Air Forces Europe. In fact, I was specifically a war planner. I was out of the cockpit, so I wasn't as happy as I might have been. But again, very fortunately for me, later in the career, I got assigned to be in charge of the Future Weapons Development section. Again, a challenging assignment, one where I did a lot of things and learned a lot of stuff that I can't talk about, but it was very interesting. And from there, I went back to Shaw Air Force Base, only this time I was flying OV-10s, which is the forward air control platform for the Air Force. And while I was there, we had dual assignments. We worked with the Army on the ground, and we worked from the air. My Army unit on the ground was the 82nd Airborne, and I also worked some with the Rangers and the SEALs. I got 80 plus parachute jumps while I was there, training with the Army and those special forces. And then after that, I drew an assignment to Knoxville, Tennessee, specifically to McGee Tyson. I was the Air Force liaison officer to the Tennessee Wing of Civil Air Patrol. Again, a very interesting assignment, one that I thoroughly enjoyed. And of course, by that time in my career, my next assignment would have been back to the desert. Oh, I left out part. I did, in fact, participate in Desert Storm as a base commander. And my assignment after McGee Tyson would have been back to the desert. But my wife and I discussed that, and we decided that 24 years was long enough. It was time to step into the civilian world. So I retired and went into the business world. I was a business consultant with clients all over the country, literally from New York to Florida, from California to Georgia. In fact, even a few foreign clients, some in Puerto Rico and some in Canada. Again, a very challenging work assignment. I thoroughly enjoyed the work. But I'll be honest, living in a suitcase, which is what you do when you're a business consultant, grew old. And I stepped out of that to work for actually one of my clients. Lowe's Companies had been one of my clients. They're a Fortune 20 company. And they talked me into stepping out of the consulting world and becoming a member of their management team. Again, a very interesting and challenging job, but frankly, I was a little bit bored doing that. No disparagement of Lowe's, but I just didn't find it as challenging as I had my earlier careers. And so I retired from them, if that's the right word, went back into consulting for a while. And then when we moved back to Tennessee, by the way, when I worked for Lowe's, we lived in North Carolina again. I moved back to Tennessee, and I got bit by the political bug after a few years here and ran for office, and in fact was a state representative for 14 years. There you have it, my background. Shortened a little bit. I left out some things along the way, like I had the wonderful privilege of representing our nation at the World Championship pentathlon events at 3 World Championships. I was the U.S. team coach as well as a participant. And lots of other bumps along the road there, but I also failed to mention that my son came into the world when we were based in Texas, and he followed his father's footsteps and went into the Air Force and became a fighter pilot. Unfortunately, the demands of the career were such that it took a toll on him. He passed away from service-connected causes and is today in Arlington Cemetery. Background complete. What questions do you have?
Wow. Well, thank you for your service, Representative Ragan. That's a truly incredible story. One of my questions is about your background is, where was your favorite place when you were in the military that you were able to visit and stuff?
Oh, that's a tough question. My favorite place, I have to say, was Tennessee, because that's where I came back to. But that said, everywhere we lived, we found a lot to like and some things not to. When we lived in Britain, when I was flying F-111s, we visited all over the countryside, got a chance to see the old castles, and even got sent to Wales. I left out that I also was on the airshow circuit for a while, but went to Wales and met some wonderful people there that speak both English and Welsh. And I learned that Welsh is a very difficult language. So difficult, in fact, that I basically decided I couldn't speak it. But I did pick up bits and pieces of other languages everywhere I was stationed. I learned to speak some German. I spoke French fluently. I learned to speak some Arabic. I learned to speak Thai. I left out the part that I was actually in Thailand during the Vietnam conflict. Okay. But of course, languages are something that if you don't practice, you lose. So when I can say that I communicated in 5 languages, that's really true. But could I now? I don't think so in any way. But the important piece of that puzzle, I guess, is I learned to appreciate their culture as well as their language. In many cases, when you visit as a tourist somewhere, you don't get to appreciate their culture other than what the tour guide tells you. And even so, it's not the same as living it. For example, in Britain, we lived on the countryside. The name of a village we lived in was Whitfield, and we were the only Americans that lived there. We were kind of like the village pets. But the advantage to that was that, I learned that there's definition in Britain, but there's difference between hamlet, a village, a town, and a city. And contrary to what you might think, it's not really totally dependent on population. It turns out a hamlet has no church and no pub. A village has at least one pub and one church, and a town has multiple pubs and multiple churches, and a city has multiple churches, multiple pubs, and a cathedral, and is on a river. Notice I hadn't said anything about how many people live in them. But that's the kind of thing you pick up when you live there. Those kind of things are not so much what you learn as a tourist.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. I know my mom, she's always wanted to go over to Britain and Ireland and look at some of the castles and stuff over there. She's told me she's always wanted to go because we've heard they're real pretty over there and stuff.
Well, in fact, they are, but they're also very cold and very drafty.
Oh, are they? I don't know if my mom would like that, though. She's a warm body. She doesn't like the cold weather too well. Wow, well, that is incredible. So now you entered into politics in 2010?
That's correct. That was my first election. And I had never been in politics as a candidate before that. I did a brief stint into politics indirectly. When I was a base commander, I was in a foreign nation, and so I had to interact with the foreign dignitaries there and also with the U.S. ambassador. And when I was assigned to headquarters, U.S. Air Forces Europe, I also had an auxiliary assignment to work with U.S. Congress, specifically the Senate, on some things, but not really in a political capacity.
Oh, okay.
So I really wasn't a politician until I decided to run for office.
Wow. Because I remember I first met you in 2010 when you first ran. I remember it was a close election, your first one.
Well, yeah, it was much closer than I liked, although it wasn't really close by today's standards, really. I think I won by 53 to 47%, something like that.
Wow.
But nonetheless, elections and campaigning is a very interesting thing. I credit winning that election, quite frankly, to my experience as a war planner, because I planned my political campaign like it was a military campaign.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and it worked.
Yeah, obviously you won. You
Yeah.
served as representative for a while, being an incumbent too, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that was I remember that was when I first met you. So, I guess while you were a representative, what was one of your greatest challenges?
Well, the greatest challenge in any case when you're in politics, and particularly in the House of Representatives in the Nashville scene, is being able to craft legislation that you can get passed. You get plenty of good ideas, both from your constituents and other places too, that you say, this is a good idea, we need to have the law for that. But it's not enough to be able to write a good law. You've got to convince all your compatriots to vote for it. Now, I was pretty successful in most cases on that, but that was the challenging part.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I guess for the viewers that are watching this, what does a state representative do in the state of Tennessee? Like, what was your job?
Well, basically, it was writing legislation, but also, helping my constituents. I literally got thousands of emails a day, a significant percentage from constituents. Some of them were telling me what they wanted me to vote for or vote against, or what they wanted me to support for laws or whatever. And some of them were coming to me with problems. Like, I'm having difficulty with the Department of Transportation or with the Department of Health or whatever. And so, many cases, those problems I could help them solve by just knowing who to talk to. I or my legislative assistant could pick up the phone and call the particular department and say, give me the phone number of the person that handles this kind of problem. We can then get back to the constituent and say, here's who you need to talk to. Here's their phone number. Or in some cases, I could talk on their behalf and say, you need to fix it. Now, of course, not everything can be fixed that way.
Yeah.
But that's part of the job.
Okay. Wow, perfect. So, state representative has a pretty important job for.
Yeah, I think so. Very, very rewarding in some cases, but also frustrating.
Yeah. Wow. So, I guess what was some of the legislation that you kind of helped sponsored and supported when you were in Nashville, like you were kind of most proud of?
Well, no, that's kind of difficult. I had an anti-slavery bill that I got passed that I'm proud of, but I suppose the one that I would say I think is most impactful is my anti-CRT bill. And CRT is, the acronym for cultural Marxism. Basically is trying to say that equity is more important than equality of opportunity. And I was able to get a bill through, House and Senate, that, shall we say, put some limits on that to make it reasonable.
Wow. I know here on Conservative Heat, we're not a big fan of CRT.
Yeah.
So.
Critical race theory is what CRT stands for. I should have mentioned that.
Yes.
But the thing is that that's just it's hidden Marxism. Marx wrote about class struggles, and it was critical theory. The people today realize that the classes don't sell in America, so they insert the R to make it race, and that's where they try to generate division.
Oh, wow, okay.
I have got to call a halt to this. I just realized that time is important, and
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Okay, no, thank you for coming on, Representative Ragan.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Being on here, and thank you guys for watching this episode. Again, please like and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and thank you for being able to tune in with us. God bless.